Welcome back to Explaining Everything, the channel where we dig into the stories, secrets, and sometimes downright weird histories behind the things you thought you knew. Today's question comes from one of our ever-curious viewers, Lena Bean 27. Thanks for the sparkly suggestion. Lena, you asked, when did people start giving engagement rings? Ah, yes, that glittery little loop that says, I love you so much, I consulted a jeweler and emptied my savings. So grab your monocle and your velvet ring box. We're going deep into the romantic, ridiculous history of engagement rings right here on Explaining Everything. Long before De Beers commercials convinced people that diamonds were forever, ancient civilizations were already handing out rings like candy. Well, not actual candy, but you get the idea. Back in ancient Egypt, couples exchanged rings made of braided hemp or reeds. Very eco-friendly, very Etsy-core. These rings symbolized eternity because of their circular shape, which has no beginning and no end. Unlike most modern relationships, which begin with a brunch date and end with one person blocking the other on Instagram. Egyptians were the first to wear these rings on the fourth finger of the left hand, believing a magical vein ran directly from that finger to the heart. They even named it the vein of love. Romantic, right? Or medically incorrect. But let's not let science ruin the mood. Then came the Romans. Oh boy. The Romans took the idea of love and said, let's make it a little more practical and slightly terrifying. Roman engagement rings were made of iron and symbolized ownership. Not partnership. Ownership. As in, congratulations! You're mine now. Here's a tiny handcuff for your finger. You can almost picture a Roman guy saying, I gave her a ring, now she can't escape, which is not exactly a Nicholas Sparks level romance. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, where things got fancier, more symbolic, and also more confusing, as most things in the Middle Ages tended to be. The first recorded use of a diamond engagement ring came from the year when people were still using chamber pots and thought bathing once a month was excessive. Archduke Maximilian of Austria decided to propose to Mary of Burgundy with a diamond ring, because nothing says political alliance quite like compressed carbon. This was the 15th century, a time when nobility did everything with a little flair and a lot of financial irresponsibility. Maximilian's diamond ring wasn't just a token of love, it was a royal flex. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, people really started leaning into symbolic jewelry. You had rings with tiny portraits, inscriptions, and even gimel rings, which were puzzle rings that could be taken apart and worn by both partners during the engagement, then reunited at the wedding. Because nothing says trust like relying on a tiny mechanical object to represent your entire relationship. There were also poesy rings, which had cute little poems or sayings etched inside, kind of like the medieval version of putting I choose you on a candy heart. Very sweet, slightly sappy. Still better than sending a text that says you up at 2 a.m. However, despite all this romantic ring activity, diamonds were still mostly for the ultra-rich, and engagement rings were not yet a widespread must-have part of proposing. In fact, most people just kind of agreed to get married, then proceeded to yell at each other about goats and wedding bread. Ah, yes, the Victorian era, a time when people wore corsets tight enough to crush a lung and considered fainting a personality trait, but also an era where love and sentimentality were in vogue. Finally, Victorians adored symbolic jewelry. Engagement rings were often designed with flowers, birds, hearts, and literal hair inside them. Yes, hair. Because what could be more romantic than your lover's follicle pressed into a locket? Nothing says eternal love like a stray curl haunting your finger forever. This was also when people began using gemstones to spell out words, like an acrostic ring where the first letter of each stone spelled dearest. That's diamond, emerald, amethyst, ruby, emerald again, sapphire, topaz. Clever, overly complicated, perfect for someone who has an emotional support gemstone chart. Still, diamonds remained rare in engagement rings. They were expensive, hard to come by, and generally reserved for people who owned at least one haunted castle and a monocle. Today, engagement rings are everywhere, and the tradition has evolved faster than your cousin's relationship status on Facebook. Now you've got vintage rings, lab-grown diamonds, sapphires, emeralds, skull-shaped settings, rings that double as bottle openers, and proposals that involve flash mobs, skydiving, or choreographed dances by 6 backup singers and a fog machine. Some couples even skip the ring entirely and go for matching tattoos, because nothing says eternal commitment like inking "Property of Kevin" on your finger. Bold move! But even with all this variety, the engagement ring still reigns supreme. It's a little glittery symbol of hope, love, and possibly debt that keeps hanging around through centuries of change, awkward proposals, and people accidentally swallowing it during elaborate cake reveals. And if you're planning to propose yourself, just remember, it doesn't matter how big the rock is, or whether it came from a jeweler, a cereal box, or your grandma's costume drawer. What matters is that you mean it, that you love them, and that you're both cool with splitting the cost of the wedding. And that's when people started giving engagement rings. Way back in ancient times with braided grass, all the way through royal diamond flexing and brilliant 20th century marketing schemes that made us believe love had to sparkle. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. Also, if you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for tuning in, and join us next time here in the channel that answers all the why, what, who, where, and how questions you've always wondered about, here on Explaining Everything.